Hello and welcome to Levels Plus Whenever, episode 123. And we're going to be talking about Neva and Silent Hill 2 Remake today. Two of my most anticipated games for opposite reasons. and yet, I have to eat a little crow because Silent Hill 2 Remake is actually extraordinarily good, despite the odds. But we'll get into that in a moment. I don't have any pickups at the moment, and we'll just save any that might come between now and next time, mainly because I just want to focus on talking about these two games. They've been burning inside of me for the last few weeks, and it's one of those things where it's like I could write it, but I feel like I want to say it, and that's part of my problem with my current review system, is that I have two outlets, and sometimes it feels better to write something, and sometimes it feels better to just talk about it. And with these two games in particular, I think talking about it makes sense. So I think I'm going to start with Silent Hill 2, though, because even though Neva's a little bit older in terms of what I've played through, Silent Hill 2 is fresh on my mind, and I feel like I have some explaining to do. Namely in that I was very harsh on the game's early previews. I recorded a video about it. I wrote a very long article about it. I'm not going to show the article because, as you probably saw at Flash, I discuss a lot of very heavy things in that article because I felt very concerned about Bloober Team and their reputation of mishandling mental health issues and being slightly sexist would gravely affect how Silent Hill 2 Remake would come out. This is a game that is about mental health. It is entirely about the psychological, and it's a masterwork in narrative on the PS2. So I was not 100% convinced that Bloober could tackle Silent Hill 2 properly, and Konami did a horrific job of fumbling their marketing for it. It looked a lot worse and made the game emphasize the combat and all things that I addressed extensively in my earlier video and in this article. If you want to see those, I'll put them in the description. Then the game came out, and the reviews were really positive. Like, Game of the Year potential positive. And that made me go, well, what happened? I love the original Silent Hill 2. I think that it is, as I said, a masterwork in storytelling. And the way that that game worked was, I thought, irreplicable. And somehow, some way, between the efforts of Konami veterans and the new Silent Hill 2 producer and Bloober Team and their love of the game that they have stated in interviews, Silent Hill 2 Remake manages not only to tell the story of the original effectively, I think it heightens it in some areas that it needed heightening. Objectives are a lot clearer for figuring out. The map is more friendly. It is more straightforward. It is less aimless. It guides the player towards where they should be going a lot more subtly and directly. And I know that kind of contradicts itself, but it depends on the instance. Like, there's just moments where it's like, well, it makes sense for me to go this way, and then if I'm not sure, there's usually white tape on something that is not at least as bright as the yellow paint that Capcom has been using for like Resident Evil lately, but it still kind of gets the point across that, hey, there's something here. The new voice acting is incredible. They got really good voice talent to do this game, and arguably addressed one of the only issues I've had with Silent Hill 2, is that the voice acting, while purposefully abstract and surreal, some of the readings read really hollow, without any real understanding or connection, because they were trying to be distant. They were trying to create this sense of separation from emotion. And I feel like with the remake that they found a better way of capturing emotion, but without sacrificing the narrative that James specifically is trying to not look within himself. He's doing everything he can to escape what he has inside of his own mind. I also have to commend how they handled Angela, which that was my biggest concern. With Angela, you have a character who has suffered incredible trauma. And I don't want to get into it in this video. You can read the article to get just a general overview of what happens. But it was a character based on Bloober's history that I thought they would absolutely mess up. And they didn't. They got a great voice actress for her. The way that her video is framed for her cutscenes is excellent. Her story is even more emotionally devastating, I think, in the remake. I think that they did that extremely well. It would have been nice if they had gotten rid of the fat shaming that still surrounds Eddie. There could have been other angles that they could have gone. I do like Eddie's voice actor. I think all the voice acting in this game is phenomenal. The writing is touched up. It's not drastically different, but it is touched up a bit, so it does flow a little bit better. It kind of loses a bit of the earlier localization. I don't want to call it jank, but just dissonance, I guess I'll say. And I feel like James's conclusions make more sense in the remake, where he lands. I got the Leave ending, and I felt like, yeah, that makes sense. And I've seen all the other endings on YouTube, and depending on what you do, that aspect of Silent Hill 2 is still there. It affects what direction James will ultimately land when he gets through the game. The new music and sound effects are also really good. Kiriyama Oka still got it. It's taken me a bit for like the really popular songs like Promise and the theme of Laura. The new versions are not quite clicking the same way as the old one, but I think that's just, there's just a difference in how how Yamaoka is approaching the music. And I don't think it's bad at all. I bought the soundtrack. I think the work here is excellent. It's just a little different, and it's just nostalgia. Nostalgia is powerful. And I think that's the thing that I walked away from the remake with, is that the nostalgia for Silent Hill 2 is really powerful. But I think that the remake manages to be 95% better than the original. That 5% is, I still don't like the combat. I understand why they made the combat the way they did. And having played it, it has a desperate nature to it that I think fits James. But I also think that I miss the element of James avoiding combat, because you really can't in Silent Hill 2 Remake. The enemies are a little bit more aggressive, And the mannequins in particular are all up James whenever they see him. So it's really hard to just weave around enemies because that's not the point anymore. That has been kind of replaced with I need to get these out of the way or I'm not going to ever be alone to figure out what's in this room or to explore an area. And the mannequins highlight that because they are ambush enemies now. They don't necessarily walk around randomly. They are hiding every single time you run into them, except for like maybe 2 or 3 occasions. And then they gain a new ability in this game that they didn't have in the original that I like a lot. But it's the fact that they are just doggedly persistent on attacking James. And in that doggedness, it, I feel, loses a little bit of what I thought the combat situations in Silent Hill 2 OG were about. The dodge mechanic is extremely good. Like, it is God tier dodge in terms of a video game. Dark Souls wish it had a dodge this good. You have an extraordinary amount of invincibility frames when you dodge. And I have kind of wrapped my head a little bit around the fact that James doesn't want to face what he's doing, so that's why he's able to dodge so well. But in the grand scheme of James as a coward, James as a person who cannot face what he's done and is doing everything within his power to believe his wife is not dead, despite saying that she's dead throughout the whole game. I feel like the combat being more of an emphasis is a bit of a drag on the overall execution of Silent Hill 2's narrative. That's the biggest complaint I have, honestly, is, and it was something that I saw when I initially was concerned about the game. I do think the combat feels good, and I do think that the combat is fun, at least on easy. I played combat easy because I knew I'd have to be fighting things, so I had to kind of let go of that piece of Silent Hill 2 that I think is important to the OG game, is that James doesn't want to fight, he wants to lose himself in this menagerie of illusions that he's creating for himself to not accept the truth of what has happened in his life. And the remake addresses that differently, and I think that's totally fine. He is fighting himself, fighting the parts of himself that made him make the decisions that he got to. But at the same time, with that dodge mechanic, I feel like he's also resisting accepting what he's doing. So I had to kind of justify these new combat additions. And I think it's okay. It works in the grand scheme of how the remake lays out the new narrative threads and rearranges pieces of the original game. But I do think that there is an element of James that is a little bit lost with this change. And that's not the hugest problem. The mannequins being ambush enemies and being like way too prevalent. They could have dialed that enemy back about 20-30% and I think they would have been perfect. But they are like everywhere. And it gets really tiring to deal with ambush enemies when you're just trying to look at something. The horror of Silent Hill is not in being jump scared. The horror in Silent Hill is what the human psyche is capable of and what it does to resist the truth. That is the horror. And it's in the atmosphere, it's in the ambience, it's in the oppressiveness of the sound design and the backdrops. That's where the horror is. It builds tension and anxiety and honestly depression being in the world of Silent Hill. And having a game that, while the new environments look fantastic and are detailed and lovely, there's just times where you can't stop and appreciate them because you get slapped by a mannequin leg. So that's really the only major critique I have, and that is impressive, because I went into Silent Hill 2 Remake with incredibly high expectations because I didn't think they were going to do it. I didn't think they could do it. I didn't think Blooper had it in them. And I was proven wrong. So I'm eating crow. I am eating crow because Silent Hill 2 Remake is, in my opinion, a little better than the original. A little better. If the combat wasn't such an emphasis, I probably would think it was considerably better. The new boss fight situations are also an improvement across the board, probably because the new combat engine works quite well. There are some camera issues, especially in door frames, where the camera just starts going like this. And that's not very fun to deal with because it kind of just adds to the disorientation of where you are at. I didn't die in my playthrough, so I don't think that easy mode was too hard and that the enemies took too many hits or anything. So my recommendation, unless you just really like the combat system and want to really dig into that, is just play it on easy. And then there's the puzzle slider, which you can make that harder if you want. I played that on normal, and I thought, outside of like one puzzle where I just did not want to do the puzzle because it's not the type of puzzle I like to do, I thought that whole element was done well as well. Done well as well. That's just an awkward turn of phrase, isn't it? Anyway, Silent Hill 2 Remake, surprisingly good. If I had beaten it last year, I don't think it would have broke top 3, but it would have been in consideration for the top 5 games of the year for me. Neva, on the other hand, Neva was my most anticipated game of 2024. And Nomada Studio made Grease, which is my 4th favorite game of all time. And I adore that game so much. You can see right there, and right there, the actual Grease plush is like up here, so you can't see it. But Grease is critical for me as an individual. It was a major healing milestone in my life, and I have been anticipating what they were going to do next. And Neva is a fantastic follow-up to Grease that doesn't hit the same highs and stumbles in a few places here and there, but is still a masterpiece of visual excellence, just artistically gorgeous and mind-breakingly beautiful. It's a phenomenal looking game. One of these days I'm going to have to do like the games with the best art design, and both Grease and Neva are going to be like in the top 5, because Neva does some things differently than Grease in that it's more grounded in reality, so to speak. Grease was using a lot of metaphor with its environmental colors and backdrops. Neva is like you're in a place, so there is like an ecosystem there. But it is so lusciously rendered with beautiful colors and line work and animation. It is a treat to the eyes. It just makes you feel so good just watching it in motion. Berlinus delivered in another amazing soundtrack, which I kind of expected. They did such a good job on Grease, and they did a fantastic job with Neva. The story is solid, but inconclusive. I feel like with Grease it left a lot to interpretation. And I kind of did that with Neva, but I feel like it wasn't quite as effective. I kind of got in my head that something was going... I won't spoil it, but that something else was going to happen, and it didn't. It just kind of stopped at a point. And it didn't quite dig in to my psyche the same way that Grease did. That's not to say it's bad. It's just it did something a little differently than I was feeling it was going to go, and that's fine. I think the biggest thing that needs to be discussed about Neva in comparison to Grease is that it has additional controls. So you can climb in this game. You can do dashing in this game, and you have combat in this game. So with Grease was purely a puzzle-based platformer. There was no combat outside of dodging your shadow. And I'm just going to leave it vague at that, in case you haven't played Grease. And you didn't really fight it in a conventional sense. You fought it with the tools that you have available to basically chase it away or avoid it. With Neva, you have a sword and a wolf. It's a perfectly functional and fluid system that Nomada has devised for Alva, our protagonist. And the game does a good job, much like it did with Grease, with unlocking more nuance and features to your moveset as you go through the game. So eventually Neva, who is the wolf, you gain the ability to launch her as like a puzzle solving device or to attack an enemy by using the left stick to aim, and then you press a button. And again, I won't specify more than that because it's important to the plot. So when you start the game, you have a double jump, you have your sword, which you can do like a 3/ combo on the ground, as well as attack in the air and you get a link down air as well. And then you also have your dodge, which can be done in the air or on the ground. So it kind of gives you a triple jump in the air, but it's more horizontal that way. And it lets you kind of slide through things pretty effectively. Maybe not as well as James in Silent Hill 2 Remake, but it is a pretty solid invincibility window to avoid attacks. And you kind of have to master that if you're going to get anywhere in this game. The combat is visceral in the sense that you really feel the impact when you're attacking, but there's not a lot of deviation from the basics, really. So you basically don't gain any new sword attacks or extensions to your swords. So you just kind of have the same 3-step combo the whole way through the game. You just get little additions to other aspects of the combat and your movement that change that up a little bit. It's more of the connection with Neva than with your actual sword play that you get growth. And in some ways, I think that's fine. I think that the combat in Neva is functional and solid. I just didn't get super engaged with it like I did with like Resident Evil 4, we'll say, where the changes to the melee being a bigger part of it and actually having the ability to parry things. That just feels good to fight things. In Neva, fighting things feels like it's a part of the overall package of what they're presenting, but not exemplary. It's not like that's the thing you look forward to. The thing you look forward to in Neva is the connection with Alva and with Neva, and the really gut-wrenching environmental story that it's telling in the background. There are some just heartbreaking moments in Neva that will just make you really sad. Really sad. And you can see the parallels to what's going on in our world. Climate change, environmental issues, like just animals going extinct, plants going extinct. It's powerful in that sense. There's a lot of Nazca and Princess Mononoke in Neva. It's very apparent that the environmental messaging of Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki has had a huge impact on Numata Studio. And that is a compliment, because they do an amazing job of taking very similar themes and ideas and putting it through their own art style and their own execution and telling their own story. That works extremely well, but you could totally see where their inspiration is, and that's not a problem. It's good to be inspired by beautiful things and powerful things. Like, I am hugely inspired by Studio Ghibli too, but I feel like with Neva that the story arc and the combat and all of the incredible aesthetic choices that they made come together in a package that I really, really, really like, but I cannot say I love the same way I love Grease. And I do think that there's some elements to the combat that I would have liked more additions to. I wish that there was a little bit more to the ending. The special ending, I'll just say, the special ending is a much better conclusion than the one that you will almost assuredly get if you just go through the game without knowing what to do to collect the special ending. I like the special ending more. It feels more fulfilling. But I need to hunt down some things to get that for myself. I do wonder if there's any connection at all between Grease and Neva, because there are some similarities, not concrete, but there's just some elements, like the temples, I'll just say, in Neva remind me a lot of the ruins within Grease. It just makes me wonder if Alva is Grease in some way, but I can't state that with any certainty, and I don't think Numata was intending anything beyond a cute little homage to their past work. But I will say that Neva was my second game of the year behind Unicorn Overlord, and it was a treat to experience, and I loved most of what I went through. There's just little tiny things that I think that for their third game that they can continue to refine and improve upon as they continue to expand what their mechanics are. Neva definitely feels like it's growing pains a little bit from Grease, where Grease had a very straightforward, relatively speaking, moveset that didn't have a lot of depth to it, but it was not needed because it was for puzzles and for exploration, wandering around this space. The story and the narrative worked so closely hand in hand with the moment-to-moment gameplay that it was a very effective, smooth for me. And with Neva, you could die. And then you had to repeat. And Grease didn't have that. But in the grand scheme of things, it was not going to be Grease 2. It's Neva. It's its own thing. It's doing its own unique exploration of grief and loss in a very different context, with additional means of acting out on those things. And it lands for the most part. I just feel that if the combat had a little bit more to it, and the narrative maybe went more in a direction where I would have anticipated it going instead of where it landed at the end with the basic ending, that I might be a little bit more enthusiastic. And I do need to replay it. I want to play it again and kind of see if that's something that I change my mind on, and it might go up on my list a bit. But I think it landed at 25th on my top 110. So that says a lot, that it's really good. It's just hard to talk about a game that is the next game from a studio that you really loved and respected and thought just changed your life, you know? And then the next one comes along and it doesn't do that to that degree. That it's like, wow, like this answered so many of the things that I was internally going through. And Neva doesn't do that for me. And that's fine. It's a very fulfilling, wonderful, delightful, incredible game, despite the fact that it didn't heal a gaping emotional wound inside of me. I didn't have that wound as big or as large or as pronounced in 2024 as I did in 2018 when Grease came out. So it's interesting talking about Neva because it's like a game that I really love, but I don't love the same way as Grease. And this is when it gets really interesting talking about games, and why I wanted to talk about it instead of writing about it, because as I've been talking about it, I've been kind of answering the questions within my own head about why I couldn't resonate with it the same way. So this was, in its own way, this discussion with you through this video has helped me figure out my feelings for it. And that's the cool thing about this lovely little video series that I do on YouTube. Alright, well, there's my thoughts on Silent Hill 2 Remake and on Neva. Both wonderful games. And again, I still sit here stunned and shocked at how good Silent Hill 2 Remake is. I did not anticipate that at all. So kudos to Bloober Team and to Konami for managing to make Silent Hill 2 with a modern lens, with modern technology, and managing to mostly improve upon it. I am impressed. I am impressed, I guess is the right word to say. I still feel that my critique is valid from where the game was when we saw it. I'm just really happy that they overcame that and delivered something that actually is respectful of the work of the original developers. And by the way, kudos to Konami for including the original dev staff in the credits. That needs to happen a lot more often. Those people need to be recognized for the work that they did. So I do have to give it to Konami. In this one case, they actually didn't forget who made Silent Hill 2 on the PlayStation 2. So I was pretty impressed by that, because Nintendo themselves can't even do that. Alright. Thank you for joining me on my analysis, as I just kind of did it out loud for these two games. And well, I hope you have a good set of days until we see each other again. Thank you again for watching, and please take care.